Howdy, partners, and welcome to tonight's tale from the untamed frontiers of the American West. As the evening sun sets over distant mountains, we invite you to lay down your weary head and drift into the mysterious world of Red Dead Redemption. Each night, we'll share different tales from these wild lands, where outlaws and legends still roam free. And when our story ends, the gentle sounds of the frontier, crackling campfires, distant coyotes, rustling prairie grass, and the soft whisper of the wind will carry you into peaceful dreams beneath the star-filled western sky, with no advertisements to disturb your slumber. Now, saddle up, partner, and let's mosey on down to tonight's tale. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Larkspur River as Thomas Aldridge secured the last of his tools in the worn leather satchel that had accompanied him through 15 years of carpentry work. At 42, his hands bore the dignified scars of his craft, calluses that spoke of countless repairs to steamboat decks, cabin walls, and ornate railings that had suffered the inevitable wear of river travel. Standing on the newly completed deck of the River Queen, he surveyed his handiwork with the quiet satisfaction of a man who took pride in creating things meant to last. "She'll hold now, Captain," Thomas called to the burly figure inspecting the vessel's paddle wheel. "That new cypress will weather better than the pine they used before." Captain Hollister nodded, running weathered fingers along the fresh planking. "Fine work as always, Aldridge. Shame you won't ride with us to Valentine. Could use a man of your skills for the journey." Thomas smiled, shaking his head. "Much obliged, but I've business farther downriver. The Emerald Star needs repairs at Blackwater before the month's end." He gestured toward the small skiff tied alongside the steamboat. "My little craft will get me there with time to spare." The truth was simpler than the excuse. Thomas preferred solitary travel between jobs. After weeks of hammering, sawing, and accommodating the demands of boat owners and captains, the quiet days on river water restored something essential in him. The gentle current, the changing light on the water's surface, the rhythmic dipping of his oars. These things spoke to him in ways human conversations seldom did. As the River Queen's crew made final preparations for departure, Thomas loaded his belongings into his modest boat. Tools, provisions for a week's journey, the dog-eared journal where he sketched designs and recorded the peculiarities of different watercraft encountered during his travels. A craftsman by trade, but something of a scholar of river vessels by passion, Thomas had documented dozens of boats throughout the territory, noting the subtle variations that made each suited to its particular stretch of water. "Remember what I told you about Larkspur Bend?" Captain Hollister called as Thomas untied his skiff from the larger vessel. "Strange place after nightfall. Best make camp before you reach it, or well past it. Not on the bend itself." Thomas waved acknowledgement without fully committing to the advice. Like most rivermen, Hollister harbored superstitions about certain stretches of water, places where currents behaved unpredictably, or where fog gathered with unusual persistence. Thomas had learnt to respect such warnings without necessarily believing the supernatural explanations that often accompanied them. "I'll keep my wits about me," he assured the captain, pushing away from the steamboat with practiced ease. "Safe journey to Valentine." With smooth, efficient strokes, Thomas guided his skiff into the current, quickly finding the rhythm that would carry him downstream with minimal effort. The late afternoon stretched golden around him, cottonwoods along the banks catching the westering light like burnished coins, water rippling with amber highlights beneath his oars. This was the time of day he treasured most on the river, when the harsh glare of noon had softened into something gentler, when shadows lengthened and deepened, creating new geographies along familiar shorelines. Ahead lay 2 days of travel before reaching Blackwater, with Larkspur Bend marking roughly the halfway point of his journey. Thomas had passed that stretch of river numerous times in daylight, but had always heeded the unspoken wisdom of river travelers by ensuring he made camp either well before or significantly beyond the bend. Not from superstition, he told himself, but from practical considerations. The narrowing of the river at that point created unpredictable currents, and the steep banks offered few suitable places to land a boat. As dusk approached, Thomas began searching for an appropriate campsite, knowing from experience that navigating unfamiliar shorelines in darkness invited mishap. A small clearing on the eastern bank, elevated slightly above the waterline and sheltered by a stand of sycamores, presented itself just as the sun dipped below the horizon. With practiced efficiency, he guided his skiff towards shore, securing it to the exposed roots of a massive tree before unloading the essentials for his evening camp. The first stars emerged as Thomas built a small fire, the familiar routine of gathering kindling and arranging stones requiring little conscious thought. This left his mind free to wander along pleasant paths, contemplating improvements to his skiff's design, recalling the grain patterns of particularly beautiful pieces of wood he'd worked with recently, planning the approach he would take with the Emerald Star's damaged wheelhouse once he reached Blackwater. As flames caught and strengthened, casting flickering light across his small camp, Thomas prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee. The evening settled around him with the gentle sounds that accompanied river twilight, water lapping against shore, occasional splashes of fish rising to feed, the distant calls of night birds establishing their territories in the gathering darkness. This was solitude, but not loneliness. Isolation without desolation. A state of being that Thomas had come to prefer over the often complicated interactions of town life. The fire burned low as he finished his meal, stars multiplying overhead in the clear autumn sky. Thomas added several larger pieces of wood to the flames, establishing a slow-burning blaze that would provide warmth through most of the night without requiring constant attention. Settling back against his saddle, placed strategically between fire and river for maximum comfort, he opened his journal and began sketching idle designs for a more efficient paddle wheel assembly, something that had occupied his thoughts intermittently since observing a particular flaw in the River Queen's construction. The peace of his riverside camp was disrupted by the unexpected sound of oars cutting water. Rhythmic splashes approaching from upriver, growing gradually louder against the background murmur of flowing current. Thomas set aside his journal, reaching instinctively for the revolver he kept among his possessions, more from habit than any expectation of need. River travelers generally respected one another's solitude, but prudence had preserved him through many years of journeying through territories where law existed more as concept than reality. "Hello, the shore," called a voice from the darkness. Female, elderly but strong, carrying easily across the water. "Peaceful evening to you." Thomas relaxed slightly, though he kept his hand near his weapon as he moved toward the water's edge. "And to you," he replied, pitching his voice to carry without shouting. "Fire's warm, if you're seeking company." The small rowboat emerged from shadow into the periphery of his firelight, a weathered craft piloted by an equally weathered woman. White hair pulled back in a severe bun framed a face lined by decades of sun and wind, yet her arms worked the oars with surprising strength for one who must have seen at least 70 years. She guided her boat towards shore with practiced precision, bringing it alongside Thomas's skiff before shipping oars with smooth economy of movement. "Much obliged," she said, securing her craft before stepping ashore with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had performed this action countless times. Name's Eleanor Marsh. Most call me Ellie. Thomas Aldridge, he responded, extending a hand which she shook firmly. Coffee's still hot, if you've a mind for it. She nodded appreciation, seating herself beside the fire with the easy comfort of someone accustomed to making camp in unfamiliar places. Don't often see folks stopping this close to Larkspur Bend, she observed, accepting the tin cup he offered. Most travelers know better. There was no challenge in her tone, merely observation, yet Thomas felt subtle pressure to explain himself. I'm familiar with the bend, he said, reclaiming his seat across the fire from her. Planned to make more distance today, but light was failing faster than expected. Ellie sipped her coffee without comment, studying him with sharp eyes that reflected firelight like polished stones. Something in her steady gaze suggested she was measuring his words against some internal standard of truth and finding them wanting. You're the boat carpenter, she stated finally. Worked on Hollister's vessel up at Fort Riggs, known for fine work with difficult woods. Thomas couldn't hide his surprise. That's right, though I don't recall introducing myself as such. She smiled, revealing teeth remarkably intact for her age. River has few secrets, Mr. Aldridge. Word travels faster by water than by land. Hollister mentioned you'd be heading downstream when a friend passed through Fort Riggs yesterday. She gestured toward his hands. Besides, your fingers tell their own story. Corliss of a woodworker, not a common laborer. Thomas found himself warming to this unusual visitor, despite her disconcerting perceptiveness. There was something refreshingly direct about Eleanor Marsh, absent the social pretenses that often made conversations in town feel like negotiating unfamiliar rapids. And you, he asked, refilling her cup without waiting for request. What brings a lady of your experience to navigate alone after nightfall? If she took offense at his delicate reference to her age, she showed no sign. Been ferrying folks across this river for 47 years, she answered with evident pride. Started with my husband back in 28, continued alone after cholera took him in 43. Know every current, every hidden snag between Blackwater and Valentine, including Larkspur Bend, Thomas ventured, curiosity overcoming his usual reticence. Something changed in Ellie's expression, a subtle shift from casual conversation to more serious consideration. She studied him again, as if reassessing his readiness for certain knowledge. Especially Larkspur Bend, she acknowledged finally. Crossed it more times than anyone living, I expect. Day and night, clear skies and fog thick as wool. Thomas waited, sensing there was more she wished to say, yet hesitated to voice. The fire crackled in the silence between them, sending occasional sparks spiraling upward towards star-filled darkness. You've heard stories, she stated rather than asked. That's why you plan to avoid making camp there, despite this being an obvious stopping point for someone traveling your route. Thomas considered deflection, then abandoned the idea in favor of honesty. Something about Eleanor Marsh demanded straightforwardness. Captain Hollister mentioned it being strange after nightfall. He's not the first to suggest caution. Ellie nodded, her expression distant, as if seeing something beyond their small circle of firelight. Strange indeed, but not dangerous, at least not to those who respect what they don't understand. She set her empty cup beside the fire. I saw the lantern first in 45, 2 years after burying my William. Thick fog had settled on the river, worst I'd seen, had passengers needing to cross, family with sick child trying to reach the doctor in Blackwater. She paused, lost momentarily in memory, fingers absently tracing patterns on her worn trousers. Couldn't see 3 feet beyond my boat. No stars or shore to guide me. Knew I'd drift past my landing place, maybe hit the rocks downstream that had claimed many vessels. Then it appeared, single light floating mid-river, moving slow but steady toward the bend. Thomas leaned forward despite himself, drawn by the evident sincerity in her voice. A boat lantern from another vessel? She shook her head firmly. No boat, no person holding it. Just light hovering above water, moving against current sometimes, standing still others. Didn't question the blessing, just followed, led me straight through fog to proper landing, then drifted back toward middle of river and vanished. Her eyes refocused on Thomas. Child lived, might not have without that guidance. The empirical part of Thomas's mind immediately sought rational explanations. Marsh gas igniting momentarily, reflection from distant farmhouse, hallucination born of stress and poor visibility. Yet something in Eleanor's direct gaze discouraged skeptical responses. She wasn't asking for belief, merely relating experience, as she had lived it. "You've seen it since?" he asked instead. 17 times over 30 years, she answered without hesitation. Always at the bend, always between dusk and dawn, always disappearing before sunrise. Never when I've tried deliberately to find it, only when need or chance brings me to that stretch of river after dark. Thomas added wood to their diminishing fire, using the task to organize his thoughts. "And others have seen this lantern as well?" "Some have," Ellie confirmed. "Others pass the bend 100 times and glimpse nothing unusual. The seeing seems particular, if you take my meaning." He wasn't certain he did, but nodded anyway. River people often spoke this way, obliquely, leaving spaces for understanding to develop naturally, rather than forcing conclusions through direct statement. It was one of the qualities he appreciated about life away from towns, where conversation too often became debate rather than exploration. "Any who've tried approaching it?" he asked, after comfortable silence had stretched between them. Something like amusement flickered across Ellie's weathered features. "Few have been fool enough to try. River there is treacherous even in daylight. Shifting sandbars, submerged rocks that appear and disappear with changing water levels. In darkness, pursuing a moving light." She left the consequence unstated but clear. "Yet the light itself navigates these dangers without difficulty," Thomas observed. "Because it belongs there," she replied simply. "As storm belongs to sky, as heron belongs to shallows." The conversation shifted to less mysterious topics as night deepened around them. Changes they'd both witnessed along the river over decades, mutual acquaintances among boat captains and crews, predictions about how the advancing railroad might alter water travel in coming years. Thomas found Eleanor's company unexpectedly pleasant, her knowledge of river matters both practical and extensive, her observations untainted by the gossip that often colored information exchanged in port towns. "I'll continue upstream at first light," she said finally, rising with the fluid movement of someone accustomed to balancing on shifting surfaces. "Need to meet the morning steamboat at Painted Sky Junction." "You're welcome to rest here until dawn," Thomas offered, genuine in his hospitality despite his usual preference for solitude. She smiled, shaking her head. "Appreciate the thought, but I've my own rhythm to maintain. River and I understand each other best when others sleep." She gestured toward his skiff. "Fine craft you have there." "Your own work?" Thomas nodded, pleased by her recognition. "Built her 3 years ago. Honduras mahogany for the ribs, cedar planking. Light enough for one man to handle, stable enough for rough water." "Good vessel," she approved. "Worthy of your journey." Something in her emphasis suggested she meant more than his planned travel to Blackwater. She moved toward her rowboat with purpose, untying it from shore with practiced ease. "If you continue tomorrow," she said, settling onto her seat and positioning her oars, "you'll reach the bend by midday. Beautiful in proper light, larkspur blooming along the banks this time of year, water clear as good conscience over white stones." She paused, fixing him with that direct gaze once more. "But if curiosity brings you back after sunset, remember that some things exist to be witnessed, not captured." With that cryptic advice, she pushed away from shore, her oars cutting water with barely a sound as she disappeared into darkness beyond his fire's illumination. Within moments, even the rhythm of her rowing faded beneath the river's constant murmur, leaving Thomas to wonder if the encounter might have been dream rather than reality. Only the empty coffee cup beside the fire confirmed Eleanor Marsh's visit, solid evidence against the surreal quality their conversation had assumed in retrospect. As he prepared for sleep, arranging his bedroll near the fire's dying warmth, Thomas found his thoughts returning repeatedly to her description of the mysterious lantern. Unlike many river stories that grew more elaborate and fantastic with each retelling, Eleanor's account had possessed the simple clarity of observed fact. She hadn't claimed supernatural origins or attributed mystical powers to the phenomenon, merely reported what she had seen with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone accustomed to accepting the river on its own terms. That quality resonated with Thomas's own approach to existence. As a craftsman, he worked with wood according to its nature, rather than forcing it against its grain. Each species had properties to be respected, limitations and strengths to be understood through experience rather than merely book learning. Perhaps river mysteries operated by similar principles, revealing themselves to those who approached with appropriate attention, rather than predetermined conclusion. With this thought providing unexpected comfort, Thomas drifted into sleep beside the gently flowing water, the occasional snap of cooling embers punctuating the night's deepening quiet. Morning arrived with pearlescent light filtering through ground fog that hugged the river's surface, transforming familiar landscape into something otherworldly. Thomas rose with the habitual efficiency of a man accustomed to maximizing daylight hours, rekindling his fire to prepare coffee and a simple breakfast, before packing his few possessions for continued journey. As he worked, he found himself contemplating his intended route with new perspective. His original plan, passing Larkspur Bend well before nightfall to make camp downstream, seemed suddenly arbitrary. Eleanor's description of the area's beauty warranted at least brief exploration in daylight, and his schedule allowed flexibility without compromising his commitment in Blackwater. Curiosity, he muttered to himself, recognizing the subtle shift in his normally pragmatic thinking. The mysterious lantern had caught his imagination despite his usual skepticism regarding river legends. This wasn't entirely surprising. As a craftsman, he was drawn to understanding how things worked, solving problems through observation and experiment, rather than accepting conventional wisdom without question. With morning routine completed and camp dismantled, Thomas guided his skiff back into the river's main current, establishing the steady rowing rhythm that would carry him downstream. The fog gradually dissipated as sun climbed higher, revealing landscape transformed by autumn's advancing influence. Cottonwoods showing first hints of gold among summer green, morning light catching dew on riverside grasses like scattered diamonds. By mid-morning, subtle changes in the river's character indicated approaching transition. The waterway narrowed slightly, current strengthening as depth increased over rocky bottom visible through remarkably clear water. Wooded banks gave way gradually to more open terrain where limestone outcroppings occasionally punctuated grassy slopes. Thomas recognized these features from previous journeys, knowing they heralded proximity to Larkspur Bend. even before the river's course began its distinctive curve eastward. Rounding a final promontory, he entered the bend itself and found Eleanor's description entirely justified. The river swept in graceful arc between banks lined with blue-purple flowers that gave the location its name, their slender stems swaying gently in morning breeze. Water flowed over white limestone cobbles that reflected sunlight in patterns reminiscent of woven silver, creating impression of luminous pathway beneath the surface. Several great blue herons fished in shallows near the outer curve, their patient stillness embodying the location's peculiar tranquility. Thomas shipped oars, allowing his skiff to drift slowly with the current as he absorbed the bend's unexpected beauty. Despite having passed this stretch of river numerous times during his travels between jobs, he realized he had never truly seen it before, had always been focused on destination rather than journey, on making progress rather than experiencing place. A suitable landing spot presented itself along the eastern shore, small cove where the river's natural erosion had created gravelly beach instead of the steeper banks characteristic of most of the bend. Thomas guided his craft toward this natural harbor, securing it to exposed tree roots before exploring the surrounding area on foot. The day passed with uncharacteristic leisure as Thomas discovered the bend's hidden features. A series of small caves punctuated the limestone bluff overlooking the river's narrowest point, their entrances partially concealed by cascading vines and wildflowers. Clear spring emerged from rocky outcropping nearby, joining the main waterway through miniature rapids that sang with continuous music. Throughout the area, larkspur bloomed in remarkable profusion, creating swathes of color that transformed ordinary riverside into something approaching the manicured gardens of wealthy estates he occasionally visited for specialized commissions. As afternoon waned toward evening, Thomas found himself making unplanned decision. He would camp here tonight, rather than continuing downstream as prudence and river wisdom suggested. Not from skepticism regarding Eleanor's story, nor from bravado that dismissed potential risk, but from genuine desire to experience this place fully, including whatever midnight mysteries it might harbor. He established camp on elevated ground beyond the beach, gathering substantial firewood for the night ahead. Years of river travel had taught him to prepare methodically, controlling variables within his power while remaining adaptable to those beyond it. If unusual phenomena manifested during darkness, he would observe with craftsman's attention to detail, rather than traveler's anxiety about progress. Sunset transformed the bend into a cathedral of changing light, golden rays striking water at increasingly shallow angles, limestone cliffs taking on amber hue before fading to purple as direct illumination gave way to reflected glow. Thomas prepared his evening meal with half his attention, unwilling to miss momentary effects that might never align precisely this way again. The herons departed for nocturnal roosting grounds, replaced by occasional bats swooping over water's surface in pursuit of emerging insects. Night settled gradually around his small camp, stars appearing individually then in constellations as darkness deepened. The fire burned steadily, providing both warmth and psychological comfort as familiar daytime landscape receded into shadow definitions of form. From his elevated position, Thomas could observe substantial portion of the bend, including central channel where water moved with deceptive smoothness over underlying complexity of current patterns. For several hours, nothing unusual disturbed the river's nocturnal routine. Occasional fish broke surface with quiet splashes, hunting nighttime insects, or simply adjusting position in the flowing water. Distant howl of coyote echoed briefly from hills beyond western bank, answered by another farther upstream. The moon rose nearly full, casting silver illumination across landscape and adding layers of light and shadow to scene already complex with nighttime mystery. Thomas maintained his vigil with patience born of years working wood that revealed its secrets only to those willing to wait for proper moment, when grain aligned perfectly for splitting, when moisture content balanced precisely for bending, when surface finally achieved proper preparation for finishing oils. Some processes couldn't be rushed without sacrificing quality of outcome. Perhaps river mysteries operated by similar principles, revealing themselves according to their nature rather than human expectation. Just past midnight, as moonlight reached its zenith, Thomas noticed subtle change in the Bend's atmosphere. It wasn't visual initially, but rather a shift in how sound carried across water, as if air density had altered slightly, creating acoustic properties different from normal conditions. The river's continuous murmur seemed to recede, despite unchanged water volume, background noise diminishing like theater audience quieting before performance begins. Then he saw it, faint glow emerging from downstream curve of the bend, where river disappeared around wooded promontory. Unlike moonlight's silver radiance or fire's amber warmth, this illumination carried distinctive blue-white quality. Unlike any natural light source in Thomas's experience, it moved slowly against current, maintaining position approximately 10 feet above water's surface, while advancing with deliberate pace toward the bend's central area. As it drew closer, details became apparent that supported Eleanor's description while exceeding it. The light indeed resembled lantern, but without visible suspension or carrier, simply luminous presence moving with purpose through darkness. Its glow radiated without casting shadows, illuminating nothing beyond itself, yet remaining clearly visible against night sky. Most remarkable was its movement, not the random drift of floating object, but directed progress, suggesting intention despite absence of discernible controlling entity. Thomas watched, transfixed, as the light continued along seemingly predetermined path through the bend's middle section. It paused occasionally, hovering motionless above particular spots before resuming its journey, behavior suggesting search or survey rather than mere transit through the area. Throughout its progress, it maintained constant elevation above water, unaffected by breeze that occasionally stirred shoreline vegetation or subtle variations in current beneath its passage. His craftsman's mind immediately began analyzing the phenomenon, seeking explanation within framework of natural principles. Marsh gas igniting momentarily might account for illumination, but not sustained duration or controlled movement. Reflection from distant source failed as theory, given the light's independent motion relative to fixed positions of moon and stars. Some elaborate human contrivance, perhaps wire suspended between shores supporting lantern that could be manipulated from concealment, seemed technically possible, but improbable given the bend's remote location and the complexity required for such deception. As these rational explanations proved increasingly inadequate, Thomas found himself approaching the mystery differently, not as problem requiring solution, but as phenomenon warranting observation on its own terms. The lantern's existence presented itself as fact, regardless of explanation, just as certain woods split unexpectedly despite careful technique or grain alignment that should have prevented such outcome. For nearly an hour, the light continued its methodical exploration of the bend, moving in patterns that suggested purpose without revealing specific intent. Thomas remained motionless at his elevated vantage point, concerned that approaching might cause the phenomenon to disappear before he could observe its full cycle of activity. Eventually, curiosity overcame caution. If the light maintained its current path, it would soon begin return journey downstream, potentially not reappearing until following night or later. this singular opportunity for closer examination might not recur during his limited stay. With craftsman's determination to understand through direct investigation rather than distant speculation, Thomas descended quietly toward his skiff. The boat entered water with minimal disturbance, his practiced handling eliminating unnecessary splash or sound. With gentle strokes that barely disturbed the surface, he guided his craft toward the bend's center, where the mysterious lantern now hovered above deeper channel. Each careful movement brought him closer to the phenomenon, while maintaining sufficient distance to observe without potentially interfering. At approximately 50 yards separation, Thomas shipped oars, allowing momentum and current to carry him gradually closer while freeing his hands for other tasks. From leather satchels stored beneath his seat, he retrieved small notebook and pencil, determined to document observations with the same precision he applied to woodworking measurements and calculation. The lantern continued its inscrutable patrol, seemingly unaware of or indifferent to his approach. From this reduced distance, Thomas noted additional details invisible from shore. The light itself emanated from central source, approximately 18 inches in diameter, surrounded by fainter luminous boundary suggesting shapes similar to traditional glass and metal lanterns, without actually manifesting solid structure. Occasional variations in intensity created impression of flame movement within non-existent housing, complex illusion of conventional object composed entirely of light rather than physical material. Most fascinating was the light's relationship with water beneath it. Though maintaining constant height above surface, subtle connections appeared to exist between phenomenon and river, tendrils of fainter illumination occasionally extending downward, touching water momentarily before retracting, like luminous roots seeking nourishment from flowing current. Absorbed in observation and documentation, Thomas failed to notice his skiff's gradual drift into faster-moving central channel. The boat's sudden acceleration as it encountered stronger current startled him from concentrated study. Looking up from his notebook, he realized his craft had moved significantly closer to the mysterious light than he had intended. Perhaps 20 yards now separating them, distance diminishing as converging currents drew both objects toward common point. Before he could correct his position, the lantern's behavior changed dramatically. Its methodical movement ceased as it hovered motionless, oriented toward his approaching boat with impression of attention despite absence of observable sensory apparatus. The quality of its light altered subtly, intensifying while focusing more directly in his direction, creating uncomfortable sensation of being examined by intelligence beyond conventional understanding. Thomas reached for his oars, suddenly uncertain about wisdom of further approach. Eleanor's cryptic warning echoed in memory. Some things exist to be witnessed, not captured. His craftsman's curiosity had overwhelmed River Wisdom's caution, potentially disrupting phenomenon he had hoped merely to observe. As he positioned oars to redirect his craft, several things happened simultaneously. The light pulsed with sudden brightness that momentarily transformed night into blue-tinged day. Current beneath his skiff strengthened unpredictably, spinning the boat partially sideways despite his corrective strokes, and somewhere nearby, though impossible to localize precisely, sound emerged, unlike anything in his experience, harmonic resonance combining aspects of distant bell, wind through narrow canyon, and something else entirely outside categorical reference. The combined sensory impact, overwhelming light, physical disorientation, and unprecedented sound created momentary incapacity during which Thomas lost control of both oars and orientation. His skiff rotated completely once before stabilizing in turbulent eddy formed where converging currents met submerged rock formation. When vision cleared sufficiently to reassess surroundings, he discovered the mysterious lantern had vanished completely. Not gradually diminished or moved beyond visual range, but disappeared between one heartbeat and next while leaving no trace of its presence. Recovering his composure with effort, Thomas navigated carefully back to shore, the river suddenly ordinary again in moonlight that seemed insufficient after witnessing the lantern's peculiar radiance. Securing his craft with hands still unsteady from the encounter, he retreated to campfire with confused mixture of excitement, disappointment, and lingering sense that he had somehow transgressed boundary not meant to be crossed. Sleep proved elusive despite physical fatigue, his mind replaying the experience while seeking framework adequate to contain its implications. The lantern clearly existed as observable phenomenon, yet defied conventional explanation through properties that contradicted established natural principles. Most troubling was its apparent awareness, the distinct impression of being perceived by something that itself consisted merely of light, without material substrate for sensory apparatus. Morning arrived with fog once again embracing the river, transforming landscape into dreamlike suggestion of forms rather than defined reality. Thomas rose early, his usual efficient routine disrupted by lingering preoccupation with previous night's experience. As he rekindled fire and prepared coffee, unexpected sound drew his attention toward the water. Rhythmic splashing of oars approaching from downriver, resolving gradually into rowboat emerging from mist with familiar figure at the oars. "Thought I might find you here," Eleanor called as her craft drew near shore. "River told me someone disturbed the lantern last night." Thomas offered no denial as she secured her boat alongside his. "Coffee's hot if you've time," he said instead, gesturing toward fire. She nodded, joining him with same easy familiarity she had displayed during their previous encounter. For several minutes they sat in silence, steam rising from tin cups clutched in hands weathered by different forms of labor, hers by decades of rowing, his by continuous interaction with tools and timber. "You tried to approach it," she stated finally. "Not accusation, but simple recognition of fact." "I did," Thomas acknowledged, seeing no value in prevarication. Craftsman's curiosity, wanting to understand how something works, what makes it what it is. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "Natural enough. Most who see it feel similar pull, though few act on it." She studied him carefully. "What did you learn from your investigation?" The directness of her question caught Thomas momentarily unprepared. He had expected admonishment for disregarding river wisdom, not sincere inquiry about results of his transgression. "That it exists beyond conventional explanation," he answered after consideration. "That it possesses awareness without discernible physical form capable of housing consciousness as we understand it. That attempting to study it directly fundamentally alters the phenomenon being studied." He paused, adding the most significant conclusion with craftsman's honesty. "That some mysteries function as complete systems which lose essential qualities when disassembled for examination." Eleanor's weathered features relaxed into approving smile. "Most who chase the lantern never reach that understanding," she observed. "They either abandon the pursuit as hopeless or continue it with increasing desperation, each approach driving the mystery further from comprehension rather than bringing it closer." "You knew this would happen," Thomas stated, recognition rather than accusation. "You expected I would ignore your warning about witnessing versus capturing." She sipped her coffee before responding. "Expected is too strong. Recognized the possibility. Some lessons can't be conveyed through words alone. must be experienced directly to achieve proper understanding. She gestured toward his hands, like learning proper pressure for planing different woods, or exactly when grain alignment will support bending without breaking. Knowledge beyond instruction, acquired through engagement with material itself. Thomas nodded, understanding the comparison from craftsman's perspective. Certain woodworking techniques required physical experience that no written manual could adequately convey. Development of touch sensitivity that distinguished between adequate and exceptional results. Intuitive recognition of proper moments for specific actions that transformed mere construction into genuine craftsmanship. "The lantern will return?" he asked after comfortable silence had stretched between them. "Always has," Eleanor confirmed. "Perhaps not tonight or tomorrow, but eventually. Its appearances follow patterns beyond ordinary human calendars, responding to rivers' changing character, phases of certain stars, and variables we likely haven't identified despite centuries of observation." "We?" Thomas questioned, noting the plural pronoun. Eleanor smiled enigmatically. "Many have watched the river through generations, Mr. Aldrich. My 47 years represent mere moment in continuous observation, stretching back to times before current settlements existed." This casual reference to historical depths previously unmentioned raised numerous questions, but Thomas recognized futility of pursuing them directly. Like the lantern itself, some aspects of river knowledge revealed themselves according to their nature, rather than external demand for disclosure. "It's helpful, isn't it?" he asked instead, returning to the phenomenon itself. "You said it guided you through fog once, potentially saving lives." She nodded slowly. "Helpful sometimes, yes, though helpful suggests intent we can't verify. Perhaps interaction rather than assistance. Mutual acknowledgement between different orders of existence, temporarily sharing same physical space." She studied him with renewed intensity. "Your encounter last night, the lantern responded to your approach, yes? Changed its behavior when you drew near?" "It did," Thomas confirmed, recalling the unsettling moment when random patrol transformed into focused attention directed specifically toward his boat. "Seemed to examine me as intentionally as I was examining it." "Precisely," Eleanor said with evident satisfaction. "Not object being observed, but participant in mutual engagement. This understanding separates those who merely see the lantern from those who comprehend its significance. The difference between your approach last night and your potential approach tonight, should you choose to remain." The suggestion caught Thomas by surprise. "You think I should stay another night, after disturbing it?" "Disturbing implies harm or damage," she corrected gently. "You interrupted patterns, certainly, but creating connection rather than disruption. The lantern withdraws not from injury, but from incompatible modes of engagement. Like conversation halting when participants suddenly speak different languages." She rose, stretching slightly before continuing. "Whether you stay is your decision alone, but having established initial contact, subsequent encounter might prove quite different from first communication rather than examination, exchange rather than extraction." Thomas considered this perspective as they finished their coffee in companionable silence. His planned schedule allowed flexibility without compromising commitment in Blackwater, and genuine curiosity about potential second encounter overrode practical considerations about making additional downstream progress. "Today, I'll think on it," he said finally, walking with Eleanor toward her rowboat. "Though I'm not convinced the lantern would welcome my continued presence after last night's intrusion." She smiled as she settled onto her rowing seat and positioned oars. "The river rarely holds grudges, Mr. Aldrich. Its nature is constant flow, continuous renewal. What matters isn't yesterday's disturbance, but today's approach. With practiced movement, she pushed away from shore. If you stay, remember, witnessing rather than pursuing creates space where encounter becomes possible. Thomas watched as her boat disappeared into lingering patches of morning fog, her enigmatic advice echoing in mind that combined craftsman's precision with newfound appreciation for mysteries that resisted analytical dissection. Throughout his working life, he had approached challenges from the perspective that problems existed to be solved, questions to be answered, unknown aspects of materials or techniques to be rendered known through careful investigation. The lantern at Larkspur Bend represented different category of experience, phenomenon that maintained integrity precisely because it resisted complete explanation within conventional understanding. Like certain qualities of beautiful wood that exceeded functional requirements while enhancing aesthetic appreciation, some aspects of existence served purposes beyond practical utility or intellectual categorization. Decision formed gradually as Thomas attended to morning routines, clarity emerging through physical activity rather than abstract contemplation. He would stay another night, not from determination to solve the mystery, but from willingness to experience it more completely. His approach would differ from previous attempt: observation without pursuit, appreciation without attempted acquisition, witness rather than investigator. The day passed with pleasant productivity as Thomas made minor repairs to his skiff, reinforcing seams stressed during previous night's unexpected turbulence and refinishing surfaces damaged by ordinary travel wear. These practical tasks kept his hands occupied while allowing his mind space to process the profound shift in perspective initiated by encounter with the mysterious lantern. As craftsman, he had always respected materials with which he worked, understanding their properties, limitations, and potential through combination of technical knowledge and developed intuition. Yet this respect had remained fundamentally utilitarian, focused on how wood could be shaped to serve human purposes, rather than appreciating its existence independent of those applications. Perhaps river mysteries deserved similar respect for their intrinsic nature, rather than value derived from human understanding. Evening approached with dramatic sky painted in reds and purples as sun descended beyond western hills. Thomas prepared more substantial camp than previous night, establishing comfortable position overlooking the bend while remaining far enough from water's edge to avoid direct interaction with whatever might manifest during darkness. His intention had transformed from investigation to appreciation, not dismissing curiosity that remained an essential aspect of his character, but tempering it with newfound respect for maintaining appropriate distance from phenomena that functioned according to their own inherent principles. Nightfall brought gradual emergence of stars, their familiar constellations providing comforting framework against which potential extraordinary events might be measured. The nearly full moon rose later than previous evening, its initial absence creating deeper darkness that enhanced visibility of fainter celestial bodies while rendering riverside landscape in subtle gradations of shadow. Thomas maintained patient vigilance as night deepened around his small camp, attention divided between immediate surroundings and broader expanse of the bend visible from his elevated position. Unlike previous evening's anticipation colored by determination to understand, his current state combined alertness with acceptance, preparation for experience that might or might not occur according to factors beyond his control or comprehension. Shortly after midnight, familiar atmospheric change signaled potential manifestation. Subtle shifting of audio qualities followed by progressive diminishment of background sounds, as if environment prepared itself for significant event. Thomas remained motionless, deliberately avoiding movements that might disrupt whatever natural process had begun. The lantern appeared without gradual emergence, arriving with sudden presence, as if transitioning from invisible to visible without intermediary states. Its location differed from previous night, materializing directly in the bend's center rather than approaching from downstream curve. The distinctive blue-white illumination remained consistent, though perhaps slightly less intense than during Thomas's closer observation. Its movement pattern also showed variation, beginning with slow rotation rather than immediate directional travel. For over an hour, Thomas observed from distance as the lantern performed complex sequence of positions throughout the bend, hovering momentarily above certain spots, moving with varying speeds between locations, occasionally descending almost to water's surface before rising again to standard elevation. Unlike previous night's perception of random patrol, this activity suggested specific purpose. Systematic visitation of particular points according to predetermined sequence, invisible to ordinary perception. Most remarkable difference from previous encounter was the lantern's periodic orientation toward Thomas's position. Without approaching shore or demonstrating aggressive intention, it occasionally paused in its circuit and directed its illumination briefly toward his camp. Acknowledgement rather than examination. Recognition of observers' presence without intrusive investigation of either party by the other. This mutual awareness without pursuit created exactly the space Eleanor had described. Context for encounter rather than capture, appreciation rather than acquisition. Thomas found unexpected contentment in this arrangement, satisfaction different from but equal to successful completion of challenging woodworking project. Mystery remained intact while experience deepened, understanding emerging not through analysis of component parts, but through recognition of integrated whole. The lantern completed its complex pattern shortly before moonrise, concluding with brief hovering directly above the bend's center before disappearing with characteristic suddenness. Transition from presence to absence without intervening diminishment. Unlike previous night's sense of disrupted experience, this departure conveyed impression of completed cycle, natural conclusion to process that had unfolded according to its inherent pattern. Thomas remained awake afterward, watching moonlight transform the bend into silver-etched landscape of remarkable beauty. His craftsman's mind still pondered possible explanations for what he had witnessed, theoretical frameworks that might accommodate light behaving with apparent intelligence, yet without material substrate. But these analytical considerations no longer carried urgency of required resolution. Intellectual exercise rather than existential necessity. Sometimes, he reflected, value emerged not from solving mystery but from experiencing it appropriately, engaging with phenomenon according to its nature, rather than imposing external expectations that distorted authentic encounter. The lantern existed as integral feature of River's complex reality, significant precisely because it transcended conventional understanding while remaining accessible to properly attuned perception. Morning arrived with clarity that extended beyond atmospheric conditions to Thomas's internal landscape. Dismantling camp with characteristic efficiency, he loaded his skiff with renewed appreciation for journey that had expanded beyond mere transit between work locations, to include unexpected education in approaching mystery. As his craft entered current that would carry him toward black water and awaiting commission, Thomas cast final glance toward the bend, ordinary again in daylight, yet permanently transformed in his awareness by experiences of the past 2 nights. Eleanor's wisdom resonated with craftsman's sensibility that had always recognized how understanding emerged through proper relationship with materials rather than forced extraction of compliance with predetermined expectation. Some things existed to be witnessed, not captured. The lantern at Larkspur Bend had taught this lesson more effectively than any words could convey, illuminating not just the river's nighttime surface, but deeper understanding of how reality's mysteries maintained integrity precisely because they resisted complete explanation. This knowledge would inform not only his future encounters with unexplained phenomena, but his approach to craft itself, deepening appreciation for those qualities in wood that exceeded technical understanding while enhancing beauty of finished work. With steady strokes that quickly found familiar rhythm, Thomas guided his skiff downstream, carrying with him memories of blue-white light moving with purpose through darkness, and newfound wisdom about approaching mystery with respect rather than demand. The river flowed onward as it always had, its surface ordinary in morning light, yet harboring depths that occasionally revealed themselves to those prepared to witness without needing to possess. As the gentle currents of the Larkspur River continue their timeless journey, carrying Thomas Aldridge and the memory of the mysterious lantern downstream toward Blackwater, our attention drifts like autumn leaves across the landscape of the frontier. The river's path eventually merges with broader waters, just as one tale naturally flows into another in the tapestry of stories that define these untamed territories. The mysteries of the frontier extend far beyond riverbanks and floating lights. In the shadowed valleys and sun-dappled meadows where civilization's reach remains tentative, other phenomena await those with patience to perceive them. Just as Thomas learned that some things exist to be witnessed rather than captured, there are other frontiersmen who have encountered wonders that defy conventional understanding. Let us turn our attention now to a different sort of mystery, one that unfolds not on flowing waters but across the golden grasses and twisted mesquite trees of a secluded hollow. Here, where evening shadows gather like whispered secrets, and the wind carries scents of sage and dust, travelers speak in hushed tones of another enigmatic presence that has become as much a part of the landscape as the ancient rocks themselves. Our journey continues in Mesquite Hollow, where locals and travelers alike tell tales of a solitary figure, glimpsed in the velvet hours between sunset and true darkness. Neither fully substantial nor merely imagined, this presence moves with purpose known only to itself, leaving behind impressions more lasting than physical tracks in the earth. As night deepens and stars emerge above the sleeping landscape, allow your mind to drift from the gentle waters of Larkspur Bend to the mysterious expanse of Mesquite Hollow, where another story awaits. The tale of the Velvet Rider of Mesquite Hollow. The first hint of dawn traced the eastern hills with delicate fingers of pale gold, lifting night's veil from Mesquite Hollow with unhurried grace. Eliza Thorne sat on her porch, weathered hands cradling a steaming cup of coffee, as she had nearly every morning for the past 17 years. The ranch house behind her stood quiet, her husband Thomas and their 2 grown sons still lost to dreams as cattle lowed softly in nearby pastures. This moment, suspended between night and day, between rest and labor, belonged to her alone. 62 years had etched fine lines around Eliza's eyes and silvered hair once rich as chestnuts, but those eyes themselves remained clear and vigilant. They swept the hollow methodically, tracking the transformation as darkness yielded to half-light. Mesquite trees, twisted and ancient, emerged as shadowed silhouettes against the lightening sky, their gnarly branches reaching like arthritic fingers toward heaven. Prairie grass rippled in gentle waves as dawn breeze whispered promises of the coming day, and somewhere beyond the ridge a coyote offered a final lonesome call before seeking daylight shelter. At her feet, the old blue heeler called Scout shifted position, raising his grizzled muzzle to test the morning air before settling his chin on weathered paws. Unlike other mornings when he dozed beside her chair, today his ears remained pricked forward, his rheumy eyes fixed on the eastern edge of the hollow, where mesquite gave way to rolling grassland. Eliza recognized the posture immediately, her heart quickening with familiar anticipation. "You sense it too, old friend," she murmured, setting her coffee aside and leaning forward slightly. Scout's tail thumped once against the porch boards in acknowledgement, but his gaze never wavered from the distance. The morning stillness deepened momentarily, as if the world itself paused between breaths. Even the birds fell silent, their dawn chorus interrupted by something beyond ordinary perception. Eliza had learnt to recognize this moment, this peculiar pocket of silence that preceded what she had come to think of as visitation rather than mere sighting. There, at the precise spot where the eastern trail emerged from between twin mesquite sentinels, a figure materialized, as if coalescing from dawn mist itself. Rider and horse appeared simultaneously, neither preceded by warning dust cloud or approaching hoofbeats. One moment the trail stood empty, the next occupied by the unmistakable silhouette Eliza had waited countless mornings to glimpse. The velvet rider moved with fluid grace across the threshold between wilderness and homestead. Mounted on a horse the color of burnished copper, the figure wore a long coat of deep burgundy velvet that caught morning light like liquid garnets. A wide-brimmed hat cast the rider's face in perpetual shadow, revealing nothing of identity beyond the suggestion of strong jawline and the gleam of eyes that seemed to hold knowledge beyond ordinary understanding. Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 3 months had passed since the rider's last appearance, the longest absence since that first sighting 17 years ago, when smallpox had nearly claimed her youngest son. She remembered that morning with perfect clarity. Her desperation after the doctor had departed, shaking his head with grim finality. Her choice to carry 5-year-old Jacob to the porch for what might be his last sunrise. The appearance of the stranger on the copper horse, who had merely passed by, tipping that wide-brimmed hat briefly in their direction before continuing westward into brightening day. Jacob's fever had broken by noon. Since then, the velvet rider had appeared irregularly but repeatedly through the years, never approaching the house directly, never speaking or acknowledging Eliza beyond that same respectful hat tip, yet somehow conveying reassurance through mere presence. The rider came and went like weather, beyond human influence or prediction, yet Eliza had come to see the appearances as something between blessing and confirmation, silent testimony that the world contained more wonders than hardship, more mystery than despair. Now the figure proceeded along the trail that skirted the northern edge of their property, moving at that same unhurried pace that somehow covered ground more efficiently than seemed possible. The copper horse stepped with impossible lightness, hooves barely seeming to disturb the dew-heavy grass beneath. No sound accompanied their passage, no creak of saddle leather, no jingle of spurs or bit, no solid impact of hoof against occasionally stony ground. The velvet coat rippled with fluid grace, catching dawn light with subtle shifts between burgundy and deeper purple, as if its color existed at the threshold of perception. Eliza unconsciously straightened her spine and smoothed her apron with work-roughened hands. She never called out or waved, having learned early that the rider acknowledged only through that respectful hat tip, never pausing or diverting course, regardless of what transpired around them. Yet she prepared for that moment of recognition with the care others might reserve for greetings with royalty or clergy, a reverence born from years of wondering and watching. As the rider drew parallel to the house, Scout rose to his feet, tail wagging with slow dignity rather than his usual exuberance for visitors. The old dog had never barked at the velvet-clad figure, not even during that first appearance when he'd challenged every stranger approaching their homestead. Today he simply stood at attention, offering canine acknowledgement that registered neither fear nor excitement, merely recognition of something that existed beyond ordinary categorization. The rider turned slightly in the saddle as they passed, and though Eliza could not see the face clearly beneath shadow cast by the wide-brimmed hat, she felt the weight of that gaze settle briefly upon her. With deliberate grace, a gloved hand rose to touch the hat brim in that familiar, respectful gesture, before returning to rest lightly on the saddle horn. The moment stretched like honey poured from jar to plate, seemingly slow yet ultimately brief, before the rider continued westward, silhouetted against the strengthening dawn light. Eliza released another breath, reaching to stroke Scout's grizzled head as he settled back beside her chair. Still keeping watch, aren't you? Still knowing what others miss? The dog leaned against her leg with comfortable familiarity, his eyes tracking the receding figure until rider and mount disappeared beyond the western rise, where Mesquite Hollow gave way to open prairie. Only then did Scout sigh deeply and lower his chin to his paws. Duty fulfilled for another indefinite interval. Birdsong resumed as if a conductor had signaled the orchestra's return, filling the morning with liquid notes that celebrated day's arrival with uncomplicated joy. Cattle lowed more energetically from nearby pastures, and somewhere inside the house, floorboards creaked as the household stirred toward wakefulness. The ordinary rhythms of ranch life reasserted themselves, yet Eliza remained seated, contemplating what she had witnessed with the same mixture of wonder and acceptance that had characterized each previous sighting. She never spoke of the rider to Thomas or their sons. The few times she had mentioned the apparition years earlier, Thomas had gently suggested that early morning light played tricks on aging eyes. Her sons had listened with childhood's open belief initially, then adolescence' tolerant skepticism, and finally adults' distracted dismissal of tales that aligned with neither their experience nor their understanding of possibility. Eliza had stopped sharing the sightings, recognizing certain visions remained clearest when held privately rather than subjected to others' interpretation. Yet she knew she wasn't alone in witnessing the Velvet Rider's passage. Occasional comments from neighbors referenced similar sightings, oblique mentions over shared meals or church socials that never developed into full accounts, yet carried unmistakable undertones of shared secret. Brancher Abrams had once mentioned casually that cattle grew notably calmer when that fancy rider passed through his north pasture. Widow Carson attributed her orchard's unexpected recovery after devastating blight to a blessing carried on horseback at dawn. Even Reverend Phillips had once alluded to messengers that pass without speaking yet leave comfort in their wake during a sermon about divine visitation. Most significant was old Samuel Weathers, retired cavalry scout whose small cabin stood near the eastern entrance to Mesquite Hollow. Unlike others who referenced the rider indirectly, Samuel spoke openly about his encounter at Mason Creek Crossroads nearly 20 years earlier. He described with unwavering certainty how a rider in velvet coat had appeared at dawn, offering military salute rather than customary hat tip, before continuing westward, without word or pause. 3 days later, Samuel had declined to renew his cavalry contract, despite distinguished service record and certain promotion, choosing instead to establish peaceful residence in this quiet territory. Knew right then my fighting days were done, he would explain when pressed for reasoning. Some messages don't need words to be understood, clear as sunrise. Eliza sipped her cooling coffee as Thomas's heavy footsteps approached from behind, signaling end to her solitary contemplation. She schooled her features to ordinary morning composure, tucking away wonder and questions behind the practical countenance that served daily life. The Velvet Rider would return or not, according to patterns beyond her comprehension, bringing that peculiar reassurance that required neither explanation nor justice to be valuable. Like faith itself, some comforts defied rational articulation. "You're up early again," Thomas observed, his voice still rough with sleep as he settled into the adjacent chair. His large hand reached automatically to scratch behind Scout's ears with familiar affection. "Anything worth seeing out there?" Eliza smiled faintly, gaze lingering on the western rise where rider and mount had vanished into brightening day. "Just the morning," she answered. "Just the morning. Coming, beautiful as always." The ranch hands were already gathering by the corral when Abraham Weathers guided his ancient mule toward the Thorne homestead. At 82, the former cavalry scout moved with deliberate caution, rather than the fluid grace that had once made him legendary among military trackers, yet his back remained straight and his gaze sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. He'd risen before dawn as habit demanded, despite retirement from both military service and active ranching, his small cabin at Hollow's Edge offering perfect vantage point for observing traffic along Eastern Trail. Eliza spotted him from the vegetable garden where she'd been harvesting late summer squash, immediately abandoning her basket to meet him at the property boundary. Though Abraham visited regularly to share meals and conversation with the Thornes, his arrival this early suggested purpose beyond social courtesy. The old man removed his weather-beaten hat as she approached, revealing sparse white hair and sun-darkened scalp beneath. "Morning, Eliza," he greeted, voice grovelled by decades of wilderness living. "Fine day shaping up." "Indeed it is, Abraham," she agreed, wiping garden soil from her hands onto her apron. "You're out and about early?" The old scout nodded, pale blue eyes crinkling at corners with subtle meaning. "Saw our mutual acquaintance passing through at first light. Thought you might have noticed too." Eliza's breath caught briefly at this direct reference to what normally remained unspoken. Abraham alone spoke plainly about the Velvet Rider, comfortable naming what others merely alluded to through metaphor and implication. His forthright approach both unnerved and relieved her, validating her experiences while challenging comfortable boundaries around mystery. "I did," she acknowledged with matching directness. "First sighting in 3 months." Abraham nodded thoughtfully, gnarled fingers absently stroking his mule's grey neck. "Noticed something different this time. Rider was carrying something. Satchel or pouch secured behind the saddle. Don't recall seeing that before." Eliza frowned slightly, reviewing her own observation with careful attention. She'd been so focused on the rider's familiar silhouette and that moment of acknowledgement that she hadn't registered specific details beyond presence itself. "I didn't notice," she admitted. "What sort of satchel?" "Leather looked to be. Old-fashioned saddlebag type, but just one instead of paired. Couldn't make out much else at that distance." Abraham settled his hat back on his head, squinting thoughtfully toward western horizon. 17 years I've glimpsed that rider passing through these parts, and first time I've seen anything carried beyond what's normally worn. Makes a man wonder. The observation settled uncomfortably in Eliza's thoughts. Patterns maintained over years carried significance precisely through their consistency. Changes suggested purpose or intent beyond routine passage. She found herself unexpectedly unsettled by this variation, though she couldn't have articulated precisely why. "Weather's been dry," she noted, seeking rational explanation. "Perhaps just provisions for the journey." Abraham's expression suggested polite skepticism regarding this mundane interpretation, but he merely shrugged weathered shoulders beneath faded cotton shirt. Perhaps so, he conceded. Or perhaps our mysterious friend has business beyond passing through this time. Thought you should know, considering your interest. I appreciate that, Abraham. Eliza hesitated, then added what she rarely voiced even to herself. Sometimes I consider following. Just once. To see where the journey leads. The old scout studied her with sudden sharpness, assessment honed through decades tracking both enemies and allies across unforgiving territory. Trails open to all, he finally responded, neither encouraging nor discouraging, though some journeys reveal their meaning only to those prepared to accept what they discover. With that cryptic observation, he touched his hat brim and turned his mule toward home, leaving Eliza standing at property boundary with unspoken questions multiplying like ripples across disturbed water. The revelation of change in established pattern combined with Abraham's neither endorsement nor opposition to following created uncomfortable restlessness within her normally pragmatic nature. Mystery had remained comfortable precisely by maintaining distance. The possibility of actively engaging it transformed passive wonder into choices requiring action. She returned to her abandoned garden basket, gathering remaining squash with mechanical movements while her thoughts traveled elsewhere entirely. The Velvet Rider had been constant presence throughout nearly 2 decades of family life, appearing irregularly yet dependably through seasons of both hardship and prosperity, witnessing their struggles and achievements from respectful distance without intervention beyond that singular exception when Jacob lay dying. The rider represented benevolent mystery rather than intimate connection, maintaining boundaries that defined relationship as observational rather than interactive. Following would fundamentally alter that relationship. It would transform Eliza from passive recipient of visitation to active participant in whatever purpose guided the rider's journey. The prospect both tantalized and terrified her, promising answers to long-held questions while threatening comfortable distance that had protected mystery from disappointing explanation. Some wonders diminished when examined too closely. Others revealed depths beyond initial appreciation. Which category contained the Velvet Rider remained unknowable without risk. These thoughts accompanied Eliza through remaining morning activities as she prepared midday meal for ranch hands and family with practiced efficiency that required minimal conscious attention. She kneaded bread dough with unnecessary vigor, her mind replaying Abraham's words alongside memory of that burgundy velvet coat, catching dawn light as its wearer passed silent judgment on ordinary lives from horseback. The rider had been observing their existence for 17 years. Perhaps balance required observation, flowing in opposite direction as well. "You're mighty quiet today," Thomas commented as he washed trail dust from hands and face at the kitchen basin. His voice held affectionate concern rather than criticism, recognizing unusual preoccupation in women whose conversation normally flowed easily throughout shared labor. "Something troubling you?" Eliza considered confiding her thoughts before familiar reticence reasserted itself. Thomas had never witnessed the rider despite countless opportunities, and she'd long ago accepted that some visions remained selectively available rather than universally accessible. Attempting to explain the significance of potential pattern change to someone who questioned the pattern's existence at all would only create unnecessary friction. Just thinking about harvest season approaching, she deflected with practiced ease, trying to calculate preserving needs for winter. Thomas accepted this reasonable explanation without question, conversation turning naturally toward practical matters of ranch management and community events as they shared midday meal with their sons and workers. Throughout these ordinary exchanges, Eliza's thoughts repeatedly drifted westward, along the trail where rider and copper horse had disappeared beyond prairie rise hours earlier. She found herself cataloging potential preparations should she choose to follow, provisions needed, horse selection, explanation for temporary absence that wouldn't raise alarm or opposition from family. By day's end, as sunset painted western sky with colors reminiscent of that velvet coat, decision had crystallized within her. Tomorrow morning she would saddle Juniper, the steady mare who had carried her reliably through territory surrounding Mesquite Hollow for nearly a decade. She would prepare modest provisions, sufficient for days' journey without suggesting extended absence. She would follow the Velvet Rider's path, maintaining respectful distance while satisfying questions that 17 years of observation had cultivated beyond containment. Remarkably, once decision formed, the restlessness that had accompanied her throughout the day dissipated into calm certainty. Sleep came easier than anticipated, her customary insomnia before anticipated rider appearances replaced by deep, dreamless rest that suggested rightness in chosen course. She woke before her usual hour, moving through pre-dawn darkness with quiet efficiency as she dressed in practical riding clothes and left brief note explaining intention to ride north-western boundary fences, truthful without revealing complete purpose. Dawn found her waiting beside already saddled Juniper as Scout settled into his customary position at gate, ears forward in anticipation as first golden light touched eastern ridge. The familiar pocket of stillness descended, birds falling silent as air thickened with expectancy that preceded familiar manifestation. Scout's tail thumped against dirt once as the Velvet Rider materialized between twin mesquite sentinels, copper horse stepping soundlessly onto trail that had witnessed their passage countless times before. The rider proceeded exactly as in previous appearances, maintaining steady pace along northern property boundary without variation or hesitation. Eliza confirmed Abraham's observation immediately. A single leather satchel hung behind the saddle, secured with straps whose craftsmanship suggested age beyond contemporary manufacture. The bag appeared full but not distended, its contents maintaining dignified shape rather than bulging awkwardly against constraints. As Ryder drew parallel to property gate, that moment of recognition unfolded with familiar ritual. Slight turn in saddle, gloved hand raised to hat brim, brief acknowledgement that conveyed neither invitation nor prohibition. Eliza felt weight of unseen gaze with particular intensity this morning, as if her intention registered with the figure, despite absence of outward declaration. No change in established patterns suggested awareness of imminent departure from tradition, yet she sensed subtle alteration in quality of acknowledgement that might have existed entirely within her expectant imagination. The rider continued westward without pause, leather satchel maintaining steady position behind saddle as Copper Horse carried its burden toward horizon with that same impossible lightness that defied ordinary locomotion. Eliza waited only until figure crested western rise before mounting Juniper with practiced ease, patting Scout's head in farewell as she guided the mare through gate and onto trail, still holding invisible trace of preceding passage. "We're just following the western trail," she told Juniper as the mare's ears flicked back questioningly at this departure from routine. Nothing alarming about that. Despite this rational statement, Eliza felt boundary dissolving beneath Juniper's steady hoofbeats. 17 years of passive observation transforming into active participation with each forward step. The morning spread before them with remarkable clarity, dew-heavy grass glittering like scattered diamonds beneath strengthening sunlight, while meadowlarks reclaimed dawn chorus with liquid enthusiasm. Behind them, ranch buildings diminished with surprising speed, familiar structures reducing to miniature versions that emphasized how quickly one life could recede when moving toward another. Juniper maintained steady walking pace as they crested western rise, revealing expansive prairie stretching toward distant blue mountains, barely visible through morning haze. The main cattle trail divided here, southern fork leading toward town and trading posts, while western route continued through open rangeland toward territories less frequented by settlement. Eliza had expected difficulty determining Ryder's chosen path, yet found herself unconsciously guiding Juniper westward without hesitation. Certainty beyond rational explanation, directing their journey as surely as any visible tracks might have done. That certainty proved justified, as copper-colored shape appeared briefly on distant ridge before disappearing beyond next geographical feature. The Velvet Rider traveled faster than Juniper's steady pace allowed, yet remained intermittently visible through fortunate combination of terrain features and timing that provided glimpses at irregular intervals. Eliza maintained respectful distance, close enough to confirm following correct path while remaining far enough behind to honor unspoken boundaries that had characterized their unusual relationship through nearly 2 decades. Morning stretched into midday as they traveled steadily westward, Mesquite Hollow falling hours behind as terrain gradually transitioned from gentle prairie to more dramatic landscape, where ancient geological forces had pushed sedimentary layers into exposed formations of startling beauty. Juniper navigated increasingly complex pathway with sure-footed confidence, her stamina testament to good breeding and careful conditioning maintained through years of ranch work. Eliza periodically offered water from canteen and handfuls of grain from saddlebag, ensuring the mare's needs received proper attention despite journey's unusual nature. Though she'd packed provisions sufficient for full days riding, Eliza found herself disinterested in food as hours passed. Anticipation sustained her beyond physical hunger, curiosity providing energy that ordinary sustenance seemed unnecessary to supplement. She paused occasionally to stretch legs and allow Juniper brief rest, yet kept these stops minimal, aware that increasing distance between herself and Ryder might result in lost opportunity to witness whatever destination or purpose lay ahead. By mid-afternoon, golden light had acquired amber quality that softened landscape features while emphasizing their essential forms. They entered territory Eliza recognized from occasional extended rides years earlier. Hidden Springs Valley, named for abundance of small water sources that emerged unexpectedly among otherwise arid surroundings. Ancient cottonwoods marked these precious water sources, their massive trunks and spreading canopies standing in stark contrast to surrounding vegetation of drought-adapted scrub and occasional juniper. The trail descended gradually between weathered sandstone formations before opening into valley proper, where scattered wetlands supported remarkable diversity of plant and animal life. Thousands of years of indigenous presence had left subtle marks upon the landscape, faded pictographs adorning protected rock faces, grinding stones worn smooth through generations of use, occasional stone circles marking forgotten ceremonial spaces reclaimed by native grasses and wildflowers. Eliza had always felt peculiar reverence in this place, recognizing sacredness that preceded European arrival and would outlast current occupation. The valley held healing properties beyond scientific explanation. Wounded animals traveled here instinctively, plants with medicinal properties grew in unusual abundance, and visitors often reported extraordinary dreams or insights occurring during overnight stays among these ancient presences. Local tribes maintained small seasonal encampments in protected alcoves despite reservation confinement elsewhere, their continued visitation testament to Valley's spiritual significance beyond ordinary landscape designation. As Juniper picked her way carefully along trail that skirted larger wetland areas, Eliza caught movement ahead that immediately captured complete attention. The Velvet Rider had paused beside massive cottonwood, whose gnarled trunks suggested centuries of continuous growth. For first time in Eliza's experience, the rider had dismounted, standing beside Copper Horse, with one gloved hand resting lightly on saddle while other reached toward leather satchel secured behind it. Without conscious thought, Eliza guided Juniper behind sheltering sandstone formation that allowed continued observation without immediate visibility. The distance remained significant enough that details proved difficult to discern precisely, yet close enough to witness unprecedented behavior from figure who had maintained unbroken routine throughout 17 years of previous sightings. Heart pounding with mixture of anticipation and trepidation, she watched as the velvet rider opened the leather satchel and removed a bundle wrapped in what appeared to be simple cloth. With deliberate movements that suggested ritual rather than casual activity, the rider approached Cottonwood's massive trunk, bundle held with evident care between gloved hands. Standing before a particular section where bark had grown in patterns resembling flowing water, the velvet-clad figure bowed slightly before placing bundle in natural hollow, formed where massive root emerged from ground. Though distance prevented visibility of specific contents, Eliza noted the care with which arrangement occurred. Not casual placement, but deliberate positioning, suggesting significance beyond ordinary delivery. Task completed, the rider stood motionless before the ancient tree, head bowed as if in prayer or communion. The copper horse remained where left, neither ground-tied nor secured to nearby vegetation, yet showing no inclination toward movement, despite lush grasses growing within easy reach. Minutes passed with rider maintaining this position of apparent reverence, before finally straightening and returning to the waiting mount. Eliza expected immediate departure, continuation of westward journey, or perhaps return along same path that had delivered them both to this sacred valley. Instead, the velvet rider turned slightly after remounting, facing directly toward sandstone formation behind which she observed, though distance and shadow still prevented clear view of features beneath wide-brimmed hat. She felt weight of direct regard with unmistakable certainty, not incidental acknowledgement, but deliberate recognition of her presence. Despite careful concealment, for endless moment, rider and observer remained connected through that invisible line of awareness, neither moving nor breaking tenuous connection established across intervening space. Then, with slow deliberation that conveyed intention rather than coincidence, the velvet-clad figure raised gloved hand to hat brim, in familiar gesture that now carried weight of direct invitation rather than passing acknowledgement. The meaning registered with immediate clarity, despite absence of spoken word or explicit instruction. Permission granted, boundary temporarily dissolved, witnessed welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Heart pounding with recognition of both honor and responsibility inherent in this unprecedented invitation, Eliza guided Juniper from behind sheltering stone and onto open trail. She approached at measured pace that demonstrated respect without hesitation, maintaining direct course toward Cottonwood where rider awaited her arrival with uncharacteristic patience. The copper horse watched her approach with unusual intelligence, evident in its posture, ears forward with interest rather than concern, despite unfamiliar presence entering its space. As she drew near, Eliza glimpsed details previously hidden by distance, intricate patterns embroidered in darker thread upon burgundy velvet coat, silver conchos securing leather vest beneath it, weathered quality of gloves suggesting years of continuous use without replacement, yet still the wide-brimmed hat cast impenetrable shadow across facial features, maintaining essential mystery despite proximity that should have revealed identity. Stopping Juniper at respectful distance, Eliza inclined her head in greeting. "I hope my presence doesn't intrude," she offered, voice steadier than anticipated given circumstance. 17 years I've watched you pass through Mesquite Hollow without following. Today seemed different. The rider remained silent, yet subtle inclination of shadowed head suggested acknowledgement. of both statement and implicit question regarding changed behavior. Gloved hand gestured toward Cottonwood's base, where Bundle rested in root hollow. Invitation clear despite continued absence of verbal communication. Understanding her role now included examination of what had been delivered with such care. Eliza dismounted and approached the ancient tree with matching reverence. Kneeling beside gnarled root, she found small bundle approximately size of bread loaf, wrapped in simple, unbleached cloth, secured with twine that appeared hand-spun from natural fibers. The contents yielded slightly beneath gentle pressure, suggesting organic material rather than manufactured goods or mineral treasure. She looked toward Ryder, seeking permission before disturbing arrangement clearly placed with ceremonial intent. Another slight nod granted approval, gloved hand making unwrapping gesture that confirmed next appropriate action, with careful movements that mirrored the rider's earlier reverence. Eliza untied natural twine and folded back cloth covering to reveal contents that immediately explained Satchel's purpose, while raising countless new questions. Seeds, hundreds of them, lay carefully arranged in distinct groupings, separated by smaller cloth dividers. Some she recognized immediately as medicinal plants native to territories surrounding Mesquite Hollow: echinacea, yarrow, willow, sage, and dozens more whose healing properties had sustained indigenous populations for countless generations before European arrival. Others appeared foreign to her extensive botanical knowledge, suggesting origins beyond local territories or perhaps varieties lost to common cultivation through changing agricultural practices. Each grouping contained sufficient quantity for multiple plantings, enough to establish sustainable populations rather than mere sample specimens. The collection represented pharmaceutical treasure beyond monetary valuation, its worth measured in potential healing rather than market dynamics. "These belong here," she stated rather than asked, understanding flowing from lifetime immersed in connection between land and well-being. "You're returning them to original territory." Though no verbal confirmation followed, she sensed approval radiating from the silent figure still mounted on Copper Horse. The Velvet Rider had been transporting healing throughout territories surrounding Mesquite Hollow, not through direct intervention, but through restoration of natural balance disrupted by settlement patterns emphasizing domesticated crops over native medicinals. The rider served as courier between remnant populations of precious plants, ensuring genetic diversity and geographical distribution that might otherwise disappear through isolation and habitat loss. Understanding crystallized with sudden clarity that left Eliza momentarily breathless. For 17 years she had witnessed healing messenger passing through their lives, carrying restoration from place to place, with methodical dedication. Beyond human timeframes or recognition, the rider's appearance during Jacob's illness hadn't directly intervened in Boy's recovery. Rather, it represented momentary intersection between different forms of healing. One immediate and crisis-featured, the other patient and system restoring, both equally necessary within greater balance. "You've been doing this all along," she murmured, caressing seed packets with newfound appreciation for work spanning decades before her awareness had registered its existence. Reconnecting what settlement patterns separated, while the Velvet Rider inclined head slightly, neither confirming nor denying interpretation, yet conveying acceptance of understanding achieved through observation rather than explanation. Gloved hand gestured toward particular seed packet containing small black specimens Eliza didn't immediately recognize, despite extensive knowledge of regional flora. She lifted packet carefully, noting subtle fragrance suggesting medicinal potency despite dormant state. "These are different," she observed, studying their distinctive shape with focused attention. important somehow. For first time in 17 years of encounters, the Velvet Rider spoke, voice neither distinctly male nor female, but resonant with quality suggesting connection to land itself. Nearly lost came simple explanation, 2 words carrying weight of ecological tragedy, barely averted. Need guardians. The request in those final words registered with perfect clarity despite minimal expression. The rider wasn't merely showing her the seed collection, but transferring partial responsibility for their dispersal and protection. The healing work extended beyond single messenger's capacity. Continuation required additional hands committed to restoration rather than exploitation, patience rather than immediate yield. I understand, Eliza responded, carefully rewrapping precious cargo with renewed appreciation for both its value and vulnerability. I'll help them return where they belong. She sensed rather than saw smile beneath shadow cast by wide-brimmed hat. Brief softening of unseen features communicating approval without exposure. The rider nodded once, mission accomplished beyond mere delivery of physical materials. Knowledge transfer completed appropriately, wisdom shared across boundaries that separated different approaches to same essential territory. Without further communication, the Velvet Rider gathered reins with subtle movement that suggested imminent departure. Eliza stepped back, giving Copperhorse necessary space while maintaining momentary connection established through shared understanding. As Ryder prepared to resume westward journey, she offered one final question that 17 years of observation had distilled to essential curiosity. Are you from here originally? This territory, I mean. Brief hesitation suggested consideration rather than reluctance, evaluating question's intent beyond literal interpretation. I belong to the land, came measured response that answered while maintaining necessary mystery. As do you now. With that profoundly simple statement encompassing both limitation and possibility, the Velvet Rider touched Hatbrim in familiar gesture that now carried weight of acknowledged partnership rather than mere passing recognition. The Copperhorse moved forward with that same impossible lightness that had first captured Eliza's attention years earlier, carrying its burgundy-clad rider westward toward destinations beyond current understanding, yet connected through shared purpose. Eliza watched until Ryder disappeared among cottonwood groves marking Western Valley boundary. Understanding she witnessed neither final departure nor permanent separation, but merely temporary divergence within continuous work extending beyond individual lifespans. She turned attention to seed packets nestled within natural hollow, recognizing responsibility accepted, extended beyond mere gardening into fundamental relationship with territory itself. Gathering precious cargo with appropriate reverence, she secured bundle within Juniper's saddlebag before mounting for journey homeward. Hidden Springs Valley glowed with late afternoon light that transformed ordinary landscape into revelation of essential beauty, inviting deeper appreciation for complexities normally obscured by practical concerns. Juniper carried her eastward with steady rhythm that suggested partnership rather than mere transportation, shared journey rather than unilateral direction. By time they approached Mescoy Hollow's western boundary, sunset had painted horizon in shades remarkably similar to velvet coat she had followed through changing landscapes. Ranch buildings emerged from gathering dusk as familiar anchors within territory now perceived through expanded understanding. Thomas would be watching for her return. Sons would have questions about extended absence. Daily responsibilities awaited resumption with undiminished immediacy. Yet something fundamental had shifted through journey completed. The Velvet Rider would continue passing through Mesquite Hollow at dawn intervals impossible to predict, yet comfortingly reliable in eventual manifestation. Eliza would continue rising early, watching Eastern Trail with coffee cooling beside her, while Scout maintained vigilant companionship. Their familiar acknowledgement would pass between them with unchanged ritual of hat tip and respectful observation. Their difference lay not in external pattern, but internal understanding. Recognition that healing moved continuously through territories they shared, requiring neither dramatic intervention nor rational explanation to accomplish essential restoration. The rider traveled boundaries between worlds, carrying connection rather than separation, despite solitary appearance. Eliza now recognized her own similar role within community: observer who participated, witness who contributed, individual connected beyond visible boundaries. As Juniper carried her final distance toward waiting home, Eliza patted saddlebag containing precious seeds with gentle assurance. "We begin tomorrow," she promised both cargo and absent rider. "Small plantings in protected places, guardianship without ownership, restoration without recognition." The copper horse and velvet rider would continue westward journey tonight, carrying similar precious cargo toward other valleys requiring reconnection. Tomorrow, or next month, or perhaps next season, dawn light would again reveal familiar silhouette emerging between twin mesquite sentinels, bringing momentary intersection between different approaches to same essential purpose. Eliza would raise coffee cup in silent greeting, receiving customary hat tip with deeper appreciation for its true significance. Some messengers spoke through silence more eloquently than others managed through countless words. Some journeys revealed their meaning only through patience spanning years rather than hours. Some healing occurred through restoration of balance rather than dramatic intervention in crisis. The Velvet Rider had demonstrated these truths through 17 years of silent passage. Eliza had finally learned to understand the language being spoken all along. Scout greeted her at gate with dignified enthusiasm, suggesting awareness of journey's significance beyond mere physical absence. Thomas appeared on porch, relief evident in posture as Juniper carried her final distance home. Questions would follow, explanations would be offered within boundaries appropriate to different understandings. Some experiences translated poorly into ordinary conversation. Others revealed their value precisely through practical application, rather than elaborate description. Tomorrow she would begin. Small garden of native medicinals behind Springhouse, where microclimate offered necessary protection for vulnerable first plantings. Seeds, carried by velvet-clad messenger, would take root in territory that recognized them as belonging rather than foreign. Restoration occurring through patience rather than force. Healing would continue along boundaries between different approaches to shared territory, connections strengthening through recognition of shared purpose despite superficial separation. And perhaps someday, another early riser sitting with cooling coffee might glimpse Eliza herself passing along boundaries between homesteads, carrying seedlings or knowledge with similar quiet purpose. Different messenger, similar message, continuity extending beyond individual participation while requiring precisely that commitment to maintain essential connection across generations and boundaries alike. For now, she dismounted at familiar gate, patting Juniper's neck with genuine appreciation for partnership in journey completed. "We're home," she told the mare, "but we understand home differently now." The eastern horizon, where tomorrow's dawn would eventually appear, remained dark with night's current dominance, yet contained promise of eventual illumination that would reveal world transformed through changing perspective rather than changing circumstances. The Velvet Rider would appear again when appropriate intersection aligned purpose with presence. Until then, seeds would grow through appropriate attention, restoration would continue through committed participation, and healing would move through territory with or without direct observation. Mesca Hollow welcomed her return with familiar embrace of cricket song and cattle's distant lowing. Thomas descended porch steps to meet her, concern and welcome equally evident in weathered features. Scout pressed against her leg with steady companionship that bridged different forms of understanding, without requiring explanation. Juniper sighed contentedly as saddle weight lifted from back, accustomed to both burden and freedom. "You were gone longer than expected," Thomas observed, helping with saddlebags, while studying her expression for explanation beyond practical details. Eliza smiled gently, newfound understanding settling comfortably within established relationship. "I followed a different trail today," she acknowledged, hand briefly touching precious cargo secured within leather pouch. "It showed me things I've been seeing differently all along." Thomas nodded acceptance without pressing for details beyond offered sharing, recognizing boundaries that defined individual experience within shared existence. Together they walked toward house illuminated against gathering night, separate journeys temporarily aligned, through mutual recognition of connection beyond complete articulation. Different messengers carrying similar understanding through territory they stewarded rather than owned. Dawn would arrive again tomorrow, as it had countless mornings before. The Velvet Rider would appear or not, according to patterns beyond human scheduling or expectation. Seeds would begin journey from dormancy toward expression, restoration continuing through patience rather than insistence. Eliza would rise early, watching Eastern Trail with coffee cooling beside her, witnessing mystery without demanding explanation beyond participation itself. Some riders brought healing through passage rather than intervention. Some journeys revealed their meaning through continuation rather than destination. Some understanding grew through observing connection rather than analyzing separation. Mesquite Hollow cradled these realizations as it had always cradled those attentive enough to recognize value. Beyond measurement, presence beyond appearance, continuation beyond momentary manifestation. Perspective might not be monetary. There was momentum the velvet coat would catch dawn light again someday, burgundy deepening to purple or brightening toward garnet as perspective and illumination shifted with relative position. The copper horse would step with impossible lightness across boundaries between different understandings of shared territory. The wide-brimmed hat would dip briefly in acknowledgement of witness appreciated, and Eliza would respond as she always had, with quiet recognition that some blessings required neither explanation nor ownership to provide essential healing, with gratitude for visitation that confirmed connection beyond ordinary perception, with acceptance that mystery retained value precisely through remaining partially unexplained, despite intimate participation in its continuous unfolding across territories shared rather than divided. Morning would arrive, bringing both illumination and continuing mystery, both revelation and sustaining questions, both connection and necessary distance. The Velvet Rider would continue necessary journey, with or without direct observation. Seeds would grow according to patterns established long before current stewardship. Healing would move through territory with ancient patience beyond modern urgency. And those attentive enough to notice would raise coffee cups in silent greeting to messengers passing through boundaries between different understandings of shared purpose. Velvet catching light like promise remembered rather than merely observed. Hat tip acknowledging witness, participated in restoration beyond passive observation. copper whores carrying healing through connections rather than imposing transformation upon separation. Mesquite Hollow would welcome dawn again tomorrow, as it had countless mornings before, and would countless mornings hence. Within that reliable pattern, endless variations would unfold, according to purposes both visible and hidden, both understood and mysterious, both immediate and patient. Those willing to follow unexpected trails might discover connections already present beneath apparent separation. Restoration already moving through territory requiring neither dramatic intervention nor complete explanation to accomplish essential healing across boundaries more permeable than commonly perceived. Velvet-catching dawnlight would continue offering silent testimony to this fundamental truth long after current witnesses completed their temporary participation in territory's continuing story. Every hat tip acknowledged not merely current observer, but continuous observation, extending across generations and boundaries alike, connection recognized rather than established, understanding witnessed rather than created, belonging affirmed rather than granted. And those with patience to notice would continue rising early, watching Eastern Trail with cooling coffee beside them, participating in restoration through attention beyond explanation, through presence beyond analysis, through connection beyond separation, that mistakenly defined understanding as isolation rather than recognition of shared purpose, differently expressed through necessary diversity. The Velvet Rider would continue necessary journey with or without acknowledgement. Those chosen to witness would continue necessary observation with or without complete understanding. Territory would continue necessary healing with or without human participation, though connection flowed more freely when bridges formed through recognition of shared purpose, despite different approaches to common journey across boundaries more imposed than inherent. Dawn would illuminate these connections again tomorrow, as it had countless mornings before. Velvet would catch light like reminder rather than revelation. Hat tip would acknowledge witness rather than mere observer. Copper Horse would carry healing along boundaries between different understandings of shared territory, and those attentive enough to notice would recognize invitation extended through silent passage, participation offered through witnessing rather than following, through planting rather than harvesting, through continuing rather than completing journey, whose significance extended beyond individual understanding, yet required precisely that commitment to sustain essential connection across generations alike. Mesquite Hollow waited quietly beneath star-filled sky, anticipating morning's eventual arrival with patient certainty beyond momentary darkness. Within that reliable pattern, endless possibilities prepared expression according to necessary timing rather than human expectation. The Velvet Rider continued westward journey, carrying seeds toward territories requiring reconnection rather than introduction, restoration rather than transformation, recognition rather than creation, continuation rather than beginning or ending. And those willing to participate would continue rising early, watching boundaries between different understandings with quiet attention beyond explanation or ownership. Some messengers spoke through passage rather than pronouncement. Some healing moved through connection rather than intervention. Some understanding grew through recognition rather than analysis. Dawn would reveal these truths again tomorrow, as it had countless mornings before and would countless mornings hence. Quiet revelation available to those patient enough to witness rather than merely observe, to participate rather than merely analyze, to continue rather than merely complete journey, whose significance extended beyond individual understanding, yet required precisely that commitment to sustain essential connection across territories, shared rather than divided by boundaries more imposed than inherent in land itself. And so, partner, as our tale rides off into the sunset, it's time for you to rest your weary bones beneath the endless prairie sky. Let the sounds of the west be your lullaby tonight, from the gentle crackle of the campfire to the soft prairie winds and the distant song of nightbirds, all flowing uninterrupted, with no advertisements to break the peace of your slumber. Sweet dreams, cowpoke, and may your trail lead to peaceful pastures tonight.